Well, ladies and gentlemen, Zoran Mamdani and the left are collapsing after Jeff Bezos sat down for an interview and confronted a few of the many things that Democrats love to do that don't work, yet they keep doing it and expecting better results, which of course never happens. This is quite the change now, as Jeff Bezos has been known to be more liberal, but when the left has gone so far off the tracks, it just becomes impossible to actually take them with any level of seriousness. As always, if you enjoyed the content, smash that thumbs up. That's the best way to let me know to stay locked in with the future videos. Subscribe to the channel. And so before we get into Bezos, let's start with Mamdani, who is now changing his tune and working overtime to try and mend relationships with the New York City's rich and job creators. Take a listen.
Zoran Mamdani meeting with some of the city's top financial leaders as he faces continued backlash over his plans to tax the rich. Madison Allworth has more from our New York City newsroom. I wonder how that meeting went, Madison.
Well, Dana, we had some insight into one of his two meetings. Mamdani spent yesterday afternoon meeting with the folks who helped make New York City the financial capital of the world to really try to contain this backlash over his tax the rich efforts. So Mamdani met with JP Chase CEO Jamie Dimon at their new headquarters in Midtown. Mamdani's office sharing with us that the pair, quote, discussed the importance of rooting out waste in government and talked about how the public and private sectors can collaborate to deliver both excellent public goods and a thriving city where all New Yorkers can succeed. From JP Morgan's perspective, they said the meeting was constructive and included the importance of keeping the city competitive. Because even JP Morgan is expanding in other markets over New York. The firm has actually reduced their headcount here and now has more employees in Texas than in the Big Apple. Mamdani also met with Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon at Gracie Mansion. Neither the city nor Goldman Sachs has given Fox Business a readout or any details of how that meeting went. These talks are all happening as Mamdani continues to try to make nice with the business community while he pushes for things like city-run grocery stores, announcing a second one yesterday, and massive tax increases on second homes. Mamdani has also reached out to Citadel chief Ken Griffin, who he called out personally over his penthouse with that second home tax. Citadel telling Fox Business that Griffin welcomes thoughtful, serious conversations about the policies that can grow the city's economy and create more opportunity for all New Yorkers, and that, quote, reckless political theater serves no purpose. Neither the mayor's office nor Griffin's office have shared any plans for a meeting in the future. Dana.
You know what's interesting about this is since Mamdani does not have a clue of what he's really doing, we get to watch him collapse in real time, ladies and gentlemen. And so now he's learning that his political rhetoric could end up costing him, New York City, a whole lot of tax dollars. Because when you build your entire agenda around tax the rich, tax corporations, punish the wealthy, and we'll just make somebody else pay for it type of mentality, you are making a very, very dangerous bet, because New York City is a place that depends heavily on a small group of high earners to fund the government. So it kind of makes sense that you wouldn't want to, run him out of town. But let's get into this Jeff Bezos interview where he responds to what has been going on with Democrats. And we talked about this before in these blue states, because they cannot blame Republicans for their failures. They have to create a villain, someone to point the finger at, and that someone has become the rich, which is why you get AOC saying things like this. If you remember, take a listen.
There's a certain level of wealth and accumulation that is unearned, right? You can't earn $1 billion.
That's right.
You just can't earn that.
That's exactly correct.
You can get market power, you can break rules, you can do all sorts of things. You can abuse labor laws, you can pay people less than what they're worth, but you can't earn that, right?
That's right.
And so you have to create a myth that since you didn't earn that, you have to create a myth of earning it.
So the left, people like AOC, Zoran Mamdani, Brandon Johnson, Katie Wilson, have been working overtime to demonize the rich. And in this interview, you get Jeff Bezos. He makes some pretty good points about cutting taxes on the working class as far as lower income, and pointing out that it's not really a revenue problem that these cities are having. No, it's a spending problem, a lack of skill, which in reality is more so just saying incompetence in a nice way. And you could add in corruption to that also. That's what's driving these cities into failure. So let's check it out.
But one of the topics that I thought we should talk about, and maybe even start with, is these days it feels almost impossible to pick up a newspaper without reading a headline about wealth in America, about the billionaire class, about wealth inequality and policy and everything else. And it's taken a uniquely critical turn, I think. And I'm so curious, before we even get into everything else, what you think about that right now.
Well, first of all, Andrew, I'm glad you're asking the question. I think it's a really important topic. And I think it's an important one to discuss because I see the same thing you do. You know, you see it in a bunch of headlines, you see it in a bunch of places. And I have been thinking about like, what is driving this? It does seem different from 10 years ago. And I think what's going on is that it's kind of a tale of two economies. So you have a bunch of people in this country who are doing really well, but you also have a bunch of people in this country who are struggling to pay rent, some groceries. And so what's happening here is politicians are using the kind of age-old technique. So there's this tale of two economies, and they're using this age-old technique of, picking a villain and pointing fingers.
I mean, really, for the sake of this conversation, the ones who are making the rich out to be the villains are the left. Mamdani stood outside of Ken Griffin's house. Katie Wilson tells the rich, hey, she doesn't care, bye. That's what happened in Seattle. Brandon Johnson pointing the finger at big businesses in Chicago, but wants to then use their resources to fund his far left radical agenda. This demonization of the rich is something we see exclusively from the left.
Yeah, but the problem is that doesn't solve anything. And so, like, if you want to help the group of people who are struggling, you have to figure out real root causes and solutions, and that takes skill. It's like the way if we have a problem at Amazon, the way we would fix it is we would go in and we'd do the 5 whys and we'd try to get to a root cause. We'd try to find a root fix. And then when we fix it at the root, you're fixing it forever. It's a real solution. And what we don't do, because it doesn't work, is just point fingers and blame people. It might feel good for 10 seconds, but doesn't accomplish anything. And so what could you really do? So, like,
Do you have a plan?
I have some ideas. I have some places to start. So, I started thinking about this and doing some research. A nurse in Queens who makes $75,000 a year pays more than $12,000 a year in taxes. Does that really make sense?
And then the question you got to ask yourself is, who do you think would be more in favor of that? You not giving your money away so much in taxes, being allowed to then take that money, invest, spend it on the things that you need. It's in your pocket. You don't send it off to the government, and then they figure out how they want to spend it, supposedly to make your life better with a program or something that you need now because you got less money.
That's $1,000 a month that could help with rent or groceries or anything. And so, and by the way, do you know what that all adds up to? The bottom half of income earners in this country pay only 3% of the taxes. It's only 3%. We can find 3%. So we don't have, it's a small amount of money for the government, that. And really, and the more I thought about it, to me, it's kind of absurd that we're doing this. We shouldn't be asking this nurse in Queens to send money to Washington. They should be sending her an apology. It really makes no sense.
Okay, but then on the other end, the question is, should you be paying higher taxes to pay for the 3% component part of this that you think is going to need to be paid for, if not more than that, given the debts we have?
Why is that always the go-to? Let's take more of someone else's money and give it to the government, who shows their inefficiencies and how they overspend and misuse money all the time because of the level of incompetence. But that's what we should do to cover up all these mishaps. Take more from the people instead of let them keep in their hand. so that way we can solve the problems. That makes no sense.
It's certainly a perfectly valid policy debate.
Right.
To say, do we want, that's 30% more per student than other big cities like Chicago, LA, and Boston. And it's 3 times more than Miami and Houston. And by the way, New York City doesn't get better outcomes.
But
So what this, listen, let me just say, if we ran Amazon the way New York City runs their school system,
right,
your packages would take 6 weeks to arrive. We'd have to charge you a $100 delivery fee. And then when the package did finally arrive, it'd have the wrong item in it anyway. We can't, that's a skills issue, Andrew. It's not about, it's just competence.
Exactly. When you look across these blue cities, whether it's Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago, New York, Portland, these places have one thing in common. They think more money will solve their issues. And so you get a Karen Bass spending hundreds of millions of dollars, ladies and gentlemen, to house the homeless. But it just ends up being a couple thousand individuals. And so the question is, where's the money going? Or why are you spending so much per person? But that is the far left progressive ideology. If you give them more money, they will solve your problems. And rarely, if ever, does that actually end up being the case. Then you got Zoran Mamdani chiming in. He says, I know a few teachers in Queens who would beg to differ. Oh, really? A few teachers in Queens who would not appreciate or want to not be taxed and keep more money in their pocket so that way they can then use it how they need to use it and not how the government wants to take it and use it. All Mamdani heard was, I can't keep spending more money. You're not going to give me more of your money to take and spend how I want. That's all he heard. And so I'll leave it right here. The reason why people will continuously trust that the government taking someone else's money and then they use it to make your life work is actually a good idea is because you have to have a particular kind of mentality, mindset, work ethic where you think that that actually is going to be a net positive. And that is what the Democrat Party is built on. Expanding dependency and social safety nets, expanding the amount of people who then rely on those systems to remain in place. Because the more people who rely on those systems and need them to stay in place, and you have one party saying, hey, we'll give you more programs, we'll give you more assistance, we'll give you more help. You just got to keep on giving us more money and, oh yeah, making sure you keep us in office. And once those programs are then created, it becomes almost politically impossible to take away because of how many people it then will affect. And that's the entire game. And that's how you end up with Zoran Mamdani, who wants bigger and bigger government. Not because the math works or the city can afford it. And it's not even because you're actually going to be getting good results. That's not even it either. Because that expansion equals more political power for Democrats. But those are my thoughts on the update. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your comments down below. As always, you enjoy the content, smash the thumbs up. For more, subscribe to the channel. And as always, until next time.